Train the muscles, not the joints.
So I was reading a comment the other day, and a guy said, in his infinite wisdom, Jason, you can't squat 90 degrees at the knee without hurting your knees. You're gonna wreck your knees squatting the way you do. Congratulations, you made it to
Stupid Comments Saturday.
The thing is with these comments, when somebody makes a comment about just one joint angle, especially when it comes down to an exercise like the squat, a 90-degree squat at the knees for one person is going to look totally different than another person based on joint dimensions, okay? So if you're saying that a 90-degree squat at the knees when somebody stays totally straight up and down, then their knees are forced to come forward over their toes and back, and all the momentum is handled by the knees. But in the squat, in most cases, there's a little bit of a bend over going on. So now if your femur, say you have a femur here, I'm gonna show you a couple clips here of me squatting more straight up and down and then squatting bent over a little bit. And there is a difference in how the forces play out depending on how you squat. See, more straight up and down, the knees have to come forward more. See, more straight up and down, the knees have to come forward more. Now if I bend over more, now it's more the hips, see? More the hips. Hamstrings are activated. Now, if my femur is shorter, now I'm gonna naturally be more straight up and down to get the same range. So that's why you're having a different experience based on a 90-degree squat. If you're staying more straight up and down, then your hips aren't coming into account. You're actually just bringing your knees forward like this. That's a lot harder on the knees. Now, a big mistake a lot of people make out there is they try to all squat like Olympic lifters, even if they're not necessarily built like an Olympic lifter, and they might not have the knees to take squatting like an Olympic lifter. So it just depends on basically how you're built, okay? But what I found is that the hip joint is the strongest joint in the body, and you want to keep the forces above the hip. That's mainly when you want to keep the forces, just because the hip can take a lot more stress. The hip is based on all power activity like deadlifts as well as sprinting. So the hips can handle really strong explosive forces much better than the knees can. And they can also handle the stopping force, like the extreme eccentric force, much more easily than the knee can as well. To simplify things, squatting 90 degrees at the knee will be hard on the knees if you stay straight up and down and you don't bend over at all in order to keep those forces also above the hip. So what I've talked about before in the past is that you want to activate the hamstring in order to protect the knee. So if the hamstring's not being activated, then the knee will take a lot more shearing force from this. So say you have really short femurs. So when you squat, you're not bending over at all, but your knees are coming forward and you're staying more straight up and down. Then you will have to come down a little bit lower in order to keep that hamstring activated, and that will be your best range of motion, is to come down a little bit lower than 90 degrees. But another person with longer femurs and they're bending over a little bit, their hamstrings are going to be activated at 90 degrees at the knee. They won't need to come down quite as low in order to get that activation. So this is why your comment is stupid, because you said 90 degrees as a blanket statement for everybody is a way to wreck your knees. And it's not, because the other obvious thing that's kind of dumb about the comment is that I've been squatting for 25 plus years and my knees are still fine. So your comment is pretty much totally, absolutely invalid and kind of dumb to make, because if the way I squat is bad for the knees, how do I keep squatting at 44 years old? How am I still squatting heavy weights at 44 years old if the way I'm squatting was wrong and I've done it for 25 years? See, the thing is, if you have a bad technique and you've been doing it for 25 years, most likely it's actually the right technique, because a bad technique will cause you to get injured within months, let alone years. Right? And the thing is, if a technique is really horrible for you, there's no way you should be able to last more than 3, 4, 5, 6, or 10 years doing it, let alone 2.5 decades. Think before you comment. Some of you guys are new here, but at least give me the benefit of the doubt. Watch my videos first before you make grandiose, superficial comments, misunderstanding everything that I'm doing. And if you do want to get attacked by the Gallantians on here, that's a surefire way to do it. So kind of stop doing that, because I got minions, right? They're called Gallantians. They're like people that have been here for a while that kind of get me. You know, they get me, man. You know, I just want to be understood. Yeah, that's right. So my point is the same point I make in every video. Exercise forces are going to play out differently depending on the person and depending on how you counterbalance the weight. So when you're squatting, there's a lot of counterbalancing going on. You have to bend over a little bit because the weight's on your back in order to keep yourself from falling down, right? You know, you can't just squat like this and then your feet are out over here, right? Your feet are here and then your knee and then your body, right? You can't squat like this. I mean, you're not anchored into the floor. So you need to bend over, knees have to come forward a bit, and you need to counterbalance this weight in order to keep that weight over the center of gravity. the center of gravity. That center of gravity will be different depending on the person, and also different depending on the weight you're using. So if you're using 400 pounds as opposed to 200 pounds, you're going to notice that your groove is different. You actually activate different muscles because the counterbalancing has to be different. So sometimes when you're using heavier weight, you'll notice that you might have to bend over a little bit less in order to keep the same center of gravity throughout the movement, right? So it just depends. But the bottom line is, the big thing you want to do is you want to activate the hamstring, and the range of motion to activate the hamstring will be different depending on the person and depending on how long their femur is, how long their lower back is in relationship to the length of the femur and the tibia. And this is what you have to bear in mind. So first priority when you're squatting, activate the hamstring, push through the hip, and then from there your knees are protected because that hamstring helps pull and keep that knee joint tight, right? Because the hamstring's underneath here, here's the bone, right? And then hamstring pulls the knee tight in here. And when it's tight in there, then your knee is protected throughout the range of motion. That's something that seems to be lost on a lot of people. They don't quite understand that the hamstring actually helps protect the knee. So in the end, even though this person made a naive comment, part of what they said was true. If you're not activating the hamstring and you're doing a 90-degree squat, then you will get some knee pain or some shearing forces going on in the knee. But the fact is that 90 degrees doesn't look the same for everybody. And even if you're doing a 90-degree squat, but you're doing it in a way where you have a little bit of a bend over or an activation of the hamstring, then your knee will be fine. And some people do this through low bar squat as opposed to high bar squat. They'll notice with low bar squat, they get more activation in the hamstring because they're forced to bend over a little bit more. And also the lower back doesn't get used as much because, you know, this is the length of the spine. And then when the weight comes down a little bit, now there's less pushing motion on the spine itself. So that's why you see a lot of powerlifters using low bar squats in their squats. It's because they're trying to bring that hip into the movement so that way they can push more weight and also preserve their joints under those loads. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope this helps you out in your training, helps you understand the science of squatting and how to work with these forces. And if you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgallantbodybuilding.com. And thanks a lot to the Patreon supporters. And you can share my stuff. That's right. It's okay to do it. It's Christmas. Why not help me out? Thank you. Hey, don't be doing a drive-by posing. Come on, man. Come on. Right, I can see that in your eye. I can see what you're gonna do. Right in front of the camera. Do I know you from a Bengals video in the 80s? You know what I mean? Walking like in a gym.